Join me as I highlight small businesses in the craft industry with interviews on-site at distilleries, breweries, and more. This podcast is all about getting to know the people behind the craft, celebrating their hard work, and of course, having a few samples along the way. Welcome to Crafted Conversations. In this episode, I traveled to Manassas, Virginia to visit KO Distilling and had the pleasure of sitting down with Peter Mowery, the distillery's director of sales. This is our 20th episode and we have so much more in store. If you like this conversation with KO Distilling and others like it, please give us a follow on social media and leave us a review and rating on Spotify and Apple Podcast. Our goal is to be the go-to craft platform showcasing amazing craft distilleries like KO, but we can only do it with your help. Now let's get to the episode. Enjoy. All right, well, Peter, thanks for having me here at the KO Distillery in Manassas, Virginia. I'm happy to be here and be welcomed and have some of your spirits, so thank you.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'm excited to talk about KO Distilling and all the good stuff we have going on.
Of course. And to be quite honest, I moved here, I told you via email, I moved here 3 years ago, and I've had KO stuff off the shelf before, but I've never been here. And I've seen pictures online. It's a beautiful space. And I'm glad this is finally a good reason to come out and talk to you and share some libations. So tell me a little bit about yourself and KO itself.
Well, first of all, I'm glad that you're here. We do have our products available in a variety of ABC stores across the state, so you can find our product readily available, but it is definitely an experience to come here to the actual distillery.
Yep.
We encourage people to do that. The weekend is the best time. Come and see us. My story. So my name is Peter Mowery. I have a bachelor's degree in business management from Virginia Tech. Graduated, went into retail management because I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do. But I loved helping people and selling things. And at the same time, I was a home brewer, right?
Oh.
So I was making my own beer, and unbeknownst to me, I was kind of selling my own product, not actually selling it, but telling people about it and evangelizing. And that's really a lot of what we do here at KO Distilling is we handcraft a lot of delicious spirits and then tell people why they are special, how they're made, what they're going to taste, and it's an experience, right? So as a home brewer, I was really happy. And as a retail manager, I was doing very well, but not necessarily what I wanted to do for the rest forever.
Right.
So in 2015, I found KO Distilling. They were looking for a customer experience director, which I still maintain is the coolest title. But that was the person who was leading the experience when you come to the actual distillery. Gotcha. So that's where I got my start here at KO Distilling in 2015. I just celebrated my 8th year anniversary, and I've worked my way up doing everything from sales and marketing to corporate operations. I'm now our director of sales. But really what that means is I've seen everything from the ground up, and I can tell you anything that you want to know about how we make our products. As we go through today, you're going to learn that, bare knuckle and KO Distilling, all of this has to do with handcraftedness, and we do everything from the ground up. We take the time to do things right. And I'm excited to kind of share that with you, what somebody might experience when they come to see us and what we're all about. But that's my story in a gist. As far as KO Distilling, KO actually stands for our two co-founders, Bill Carlson and John O'Mara. Both of them went to the United States Merchant Marine Academy in Kings Point, New York. And both knew each other during that time, and were friends, but weren't necessarily the closest of friends. They interacted with each other. Both went off and did their own thing. They went into the nautical industry, sailed in the nautical industry, and were a part of the Navy Reserve.
Cool.
Both went into defense contracting, retired early, both as successful business people, and said, well, what the heck do we do now? Let's start a distillery. So they kind of came back together through a reunion where they saw each other and said, yeah, I think, craft distillation is on the rise. It was kind of on the heels of the craft brewing revolution,
yep.
Which is kind of where my story took me as well. I wanted to do something within the craft alcohol industry. And that's where I kind of came to KO Distilling in 2015. So the two of them, Bill and John, started in 2013, the company. Took 2 years to really kind of get everything up and running. So in 2015 is when we started producing spirits. But KO Distilling obviously stands for Bill Carlson and John O'Mara. Those are the two co-founders. We like to say think knockout, right? And our line of whiskeys, our predominant line of whiskeys is bare knuckle whiskeys. And that's a play on KO right there. So that, in a nutshell, is where we got our start. Currently, we produce a variety of different spirits. We do wheat whiskey, rye whiskey, bourbon whiskey. In addition to bare knuckle whiskeys, we also have distillers reserve whiskeys, which we'll get to try in a little bit here. Those are our bottle and bond, highest end, a little bit longer aged, really beautiful. Both of those, distillers reserve bourbon and distillers reserve rye whiskey, have won double gold in the San Francisco World Spirits Competition.
Very cool.
And I'm excited for you to get to try those as well.
Yeah, and you also have a gin and a vodka, or just gin?
So we don't do vodka.
Okay.
What we really wanted to do is kind of reflect our founders. So John O'Mara, the O and KO, really enjoys gin, right? He was a Bombay Sapphire drinker before he made his own. Did a bunch of research, right? You got to do a lot of research when you start out, and tried a bunch of gins, identified which botanicals he really enjoyed. We produce Battle Standard 142 Navy Strength Gin, Standard Strength Gin, and Barrel Finish Gin. The one that's most popular and you can find the most readily is Navy Strength Gin. In case you don't know, Navy Strength is a British term, which means it's a spirit that's proofed up to 114 proof. It's high enough in alcohol. If you spill it on gunpowder, you can still ignite the gunpowder. So it has a nautical aspect to it, which also fits with our co-founders.
Right.
But essentially, if you have heavy seas, take damage in battle, you still got to be able to use the gunpowder. Right. So our Battle Standard 142 Navy Strength Gin, if you spill it on gunpowder, you could still actually utilize that. Battle Standard 142, the line of gins all still has the same botanicals. It's just how it's prepared. Navy Strength being 114, Standard Strength 90 proof, and then barrel finished, actually resting in a used bourbon barrel. But they're going to have 8 different botanicals. Juniper up front, as it needs to be for a gin. You're going to have bitter orange peel and cinnamon. And those are the big 3 that you're going to get in that Battle Standard 142 Navy Strength Gin. But you're also going to have in there cardamom, coriander, grains of paradise, angelica root, and orris root. And so if you have a really good palate, you're going to detect kind of a subtle array of earth, spice, and floral notes in there. But I think a lot of people gravitate towards the Navy Strength because it is crisp and clean, big, bold, vibrant juniper up front, citrus in the middle, cinnamon finish. And I say this because we have lots of whiskey drinkers who come to us who leave with a bottle of gin and realize, hey, if this is gin, maybe I need to give this a shot. One of the things that we like to do here is educate people, and there are different styles of gin, obviously, but we do a American dry style of gin, less juniper, more other botanicals, whereas something like a Bombay Sapphire, as I mentioned earlier, is a classic London dry. It's going to be predominantly juniper, and other botanicals are going to be a lot less. So we like to bring that American flair to it. And you'd be surprised how many people become gin drinkers once they try our product.
Well, I'll be honest, I'm kind of in that camp. I'm a big whiskey guy. I love whiskey, and I whenever I think about gin, I think about drinking a pine sol or a Christmas tree. I hated that. And I started, going to different distilleries and learning about a lot of whiskey makers. White spirits sell faster and they're easier to make. You have to age it. There's less of an investment. So I found these gins that were phenomenal. And I fell in love with a gin down south in North Carolina at Fainting Goat Spirits. And they make a phenomenal gin. It doesn't taste like gin to me, so I enjoy it. But part of that is the craft and the experimental process of these craft distilleries, like what KO's doing, is that you can play and do what you kind of want. And where the big boys are kind of tied to what, it's a white label Jim Beam, right? And that's okay. But you have so much more room to play with different things. So tell me a little bit about that craft process and how much, is it fun to work here? I'm sure it is. It's a dumb question, but to watch the distillers just kind of do what they want.
That is correct. What I will tell you is that I've already today needed to QC check something, right? So I've already imbibed a little bit today, but honestly, there is a very serious QC check process. When we do release something to the general public, we do have, a variety of KO members who are a part of that to make sure that what we're putting out is a quality spirit every single time, and it's matching the quality from the time before. Right. So to your point, we did release the gin initially because it is a white spirit, meaning it does not need to age. We can release it to the public right off the bat. And you need something if you're going to do everything from scratch. And so one of the things that really defines KO is the fact that we took the time to do everything from scratch. So here at KO Distilling, we start with 100% Virginia-based grain for all of our whiskeys.
Cool.
We get our grain from Bay's Best Feed, which is a farm on the northern neck of Virginia. That farmer will come back to the back of our building, basically dump the grain right into an auger that fills up our silos, and we're ready to go. We go through the whole process, which I would love to explain a little bit more in depth a little bit later, but we mill, mash, ferment, distill, barrel, bottle, everything right here on site. But that takes a lot of time, especially the barrel aging process. And so in the meantime, we needed to have something to sell.
Right.
So we did start with our gins, and we do have a white whiskey as well, just called Knuckle American Whiskey, which is very good. If you want a moonshine margarita or a Manassas mule instead of a Moscow mule,
sure,
I can make you up a dynamic cocktail with that product as well.
Cool.
But that was the baseline for our Bare Knuckle Wheat Whiskey, which was the first aged spirit that we actually started with. And I'd love to tell you a little bit more about that spirit as well.
Well, I think, and you probably abide by this too, is that, your white spirits started, pay the bills, and then your white whiskey, your white dog, if your white dog's not any good, putting it in a barrel and aging it is not going to make it any better. So do you think there's a little bit of a quality improvement because you have such a hand on the process? This is much more of a smaller operation. It's locally sourced, locally grown, and it's kind of a, every step of the way your hands are touching the whiskey. Does that add to the quality? Does it add to the story? Do you think the market's kind of changing to where people are kind of honing in on that and saying, they're a small local shop. I like that more than the big guys. Is there something to that?
Yes, of course. We are handcrafted through and through. We do have our hands in every single aspect. And what I will tell you is when we do the white whiskey, we are using a different still than we use for our whiskey that we know we're going to have the time to age a little bit longer.
Oh.
So giving you a little bit of background history, we started in 2015 producing spirits, and we started on a 550 gallon Vendome hybrid pot and column still. And that can produce at its maximum, we were putting out about 225 53 gallon barrels every year. Okay. But we realized very quickly that our dreams were a lot bigger than that. And so in 2017, only 2 years after starting, we actually expanded to a 12-inch 30-foot column still, beer column still. And that is a Vendome, 30-foot Vendome beer column still. So by the word beer, you know that our heart is in the whiskey, right? We're not making vodka, we're making whiskey. But when you're producing something like a white spirit, Bare Knuckle American Whiskey, it has to be good to drink right up front. The beauty of having multiple stills is you can have your distiller basically taste that as it's coming off. And the process of cuts, heads, hearts, and tails, is going to be much more tasting and feel, as opposed to a column where it's going to be a little bit more automatic.
Right.
And one of the beauties of that column still is kind of like a broadsword. You can do a lot with it. We have a lot of technology that helps us do what we do. Part of the coolness of the pot still is that it's a little bit more, you're in the driver's seat. You are the one making the cuts because you're tasting something. And so the white spirit is still produced to this day on the pot still.
Wow.
And initially our Bare Knuckle Wheat Whiskey, which we released at 12 months old, which now looking back seems like such a young whiskey, but we produced that on the pot still with just the heart of hearts. So we left off all the heads, all the tails. So it didn't really have a lot of room to grow, but it was good right up front. And the way that we distill now has changed substantially in that we know we're going to take the time to give that 4 or 5 years or whatnot before it comes to fruition. And so we can distill that differently, including parts of the tails and making sure that it has the room for its growth. So one of the cool things about working here is watching that process change, exactly what you were talking about. We do have, as a small distillery, the ability to watch and learn and say, let's make these changes. Barrel entry proof could be different and it could change the flavor, or the style of distillation is going to help us to achieve something, and that's going to make the best whiskey possible. One of the things that the listeners are not going to be able to see, but I would encourage them to come and view with us here, is the 30-foot continuous beer column still is taller than the building. Okay.
That's cool.
So in 2017, we cut a hole in our ceiling. We crane lifted this still in, bolted it to the floor, and then built a doghouse over top of the building. And that's one of the things we talk about on the tour. I take that for granted because I walk past it every day and I get to see this beautiful, marvel. But basically, if that's not a show of our commitment to quality, I'm not sure what is. A lot of people would say, the building's 28 foot tall. We're going to have a still that fits in the building. Here are the limitations. Whereas our founders really said, here's the still that's going to produce the best whiskey possible. How do we make this work? And so to answer your question, yes, as a young distillery, as a small distillery, even at our size, we do have the ability to play with things and to experiment and have fun and to find the best way to produce whiskey.
I know you in your position, you're not specifically working on the whiskey itself, but was there much of a learning experience when they first came and made this? Was there a trial and error process of like, oh, let's age this bourbon for 12 months or 42 months, or something doesn't work, this tastes like crap? How much of that was a uphill battle for this small operation?
So what I will say is that our two founders, Bill Carlson and John O'Mara, were very smart in hiring people who knew what they were doing.
Gotcha.
So one of my coworkers and a close friend of mine is Ryan Hendricks, who's our head distiller. Ryan has a bachelor's in chemical physics and a master's in chemical engineering from Michigan State University. He has interned for Jim Beam, and he actually in college worked for Red Cedar, which was attached to MSU. So he came to us with a lot of knowledge of the chemistry behind distillation and a passion for that as well. So what I would say is, if we did not have somebody like that to help us get our start, we would have been fumbling around saying, what the heck are we doing here? Does this taste good? Why is that, etc. But
right.
What Ryan brings to the table is a beautiful perspective from a chemistry point. I love talking to Ryan. Sometimes, I go into his office and ask, how many barrels of a certain type do we have? And it turns into a 45-minute conversation about the tannic structure of whiskey. And so, it's wonderful actually hearing that wealth of knowledge. But if I ever need to understand why glass cracked in a certain way, I can ask him, and he can say from a molecular level, here's what we're doing here. Or, hey, why is it that flocking occurs, right, in spirits that are non-chill filtered or whatnot? Because sometimes people have questions about that type of thing. He is able to answer things from a chemistry perspective that I think the majority of the population cannot. And so having him has been an asset in building the process to what it is, if that makes sense.
So I know you said you came from brewing as a home brewer.
So yes, my background was just in the home brewing side of the equation. So I knew a lot more about how beer is made and whatnot, and that's essentially what we're doing here.
Yeah.
Beer is just unfinished whiskey.
Right. That's true. And I'm kind of curious, were you a whiskey drinker prior, or did this job make you a whiskey drinker?
More of the latter.
Okay.
So I was a whiskey drinker prior, but it was more like I tolerated whiskey. It wasn't something that I sought after.
Sure.
As a craft beer drinker, I sought all different cool, interesting brews. When I got here, I distinctly remember accepting the job and talking to a friend who is much more well-versed in whiskey. And he was asking me some pretty basic questions. And I remember thinking to myself, what have I gotten myself into? I know nothing about what I'm about to jump into. But I think one of my strong suits is I try to be a sponge in all situations. I try to learn as much as possible. And one of the things that is actually surprising even to this day is how little some people know about distillation and what we have to go through in order to get a bottle of our delicious product in front of somebody, which makes it even more enjoyable to lead somebody on a tour and say, here are the steps that we always go through in order to make the best product possible. Here's how the system actually works behind the curtain. So as much of a novice as I was before KO, I've grown into somebody who knows quite a bit because I've asked all those questions. And I would encourage any and all listeners to ask as many questions as possible, especially on tours and whatnot. That's what we're here to do. We want to teach.
Right. Yeah. Speaking of that, not to give away any trade secrets, so don't do that. But is there anything unique that KO is doing in the distillation process or the production process that sets you apart from other places that you've seen? Because I know distillation's a science, right? So there's not much room to play there, but
what I would say is that KO Distilling takes the time to do things the traditional way.
Okay.
Right. So every distillery is going to have its own distillery character. So if we gave our recipes to another distillery and they were to use the times and temperatures and the equipment that they have, it would result in a different whiskey. Right. So in addition to having people who understand kind of the chemical properties of what's going on, there is a process and procedure that we have that is going to be very hard for other people to replicate. And I think specifically to those here in Virginia, we are one of the larger distilleries within Virginia. So what I would say is, if you go through the process and I list for you, the equipment that we use, the process and the procedure that we use, you'll get a better understanding of how we actually produce our product. And all of that combined is really where the distillery character comes into play. I will also tell you we go high end on everything. So we use a Vendome still or Vendome stills. We use Kelvin cooperage barrels. We use we try to go as high end on everything as we can. And so I think that kind of sets us apart as well.
Yeah.
But we take the time to do things right. We go the traditional route. We age in 53-gallon barrels as opposed to doing small barrels, which, there's nothing wrong with that. That comes with its own complications and challenges and that type of thing as well. The other thing is we are very transparent and honest about what we do here. I will, when I'm on a tour, basically show pretty much everything that we do here. And so I hope that as we talk today, I can share some of those things and go through the process, kind of a verbal tour of our distillery, so that you can understand what that distillery character actually looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's, I'm sure there's much more room for you guys to grow too. Is there a plan to get bigger and bigger with distribution, or are you trying to stay just local in Virginia? What's the what is the 5-year, 10-year plan for KO?
Yeah, absolutely. So the distribution before the last couple of years has been Virginia, DC, Delaware, and Maryland. Okay. So just kind of mid-Atlantic. However, we are working with a group called the Independent Distributors Network, or IDN, and our products are now actually available in Massachusetts and Connecticut, in Missouri, in Minnesota, and Michigan. So to varying different levels, but we are working with different distributors who kind of reflect some of the same values in craft that we do as well. So we're really looking for growth in certain markets or whatnot. It's been an eye-opening experience in the last year, understanding the different liquor laws in every single state.
Yeah.
Before I was the director of sales, I was the sales and marketing director for Virginia. So I'm very well versed on how Virginia works, but Virginia is not the norm. There is no norm. It's different for every single state. And so it's interesting, trying to work with different distributors or brokers and the level of enthusiasm, the level of what they're able to do, what we're able to do, how much boots on the ground we need to have in order to be successful. So I do believe that our goal is to expand, but I think what we're going to do is, instead of expanding as rapidly as possible, we want to be very strategic about that and find partners who are going to help us to grow, knowing that we produce a great product that they can then sell as well.
Gotcha. Well, before we cheers to that with a first sample, because I'm getting thirsty looking at these bottles, but has there been any talk about maybe doing something other than whiskey or gin? Have you thought about doing a vodka or a brandy or any kind of experimental runs down the road?
That's a good question. The reason why we've shied away from vodka is because really a lot of the point of vodka is to take flavor out, right?
Right.
And so that's why the direction was towards gin as opposed to vodka. So I do not see us doing a vodka. For our gin, we use a grain neutral spirit that is purchased. And I tell people it's kind of like a blank canvas. What we do is a secondary distillation with all those beautiful botanicals we talked about earlier in order to paint the picture that is that gin. So vodka, I think we wouldn't have that ability to do. Brandy might be something kind of interesting. I will say that I feel like the market for whiskey is a lot greater than the market for brandy. And I think one of the things that we've kind of shown is we want to be the best at what we do, as opposed to a jack of all trades that does a little bit of everything, if that makes sense.
Overstretched. Right.
We want, when you taste bare knuckle whiskey or Distiller's Reserve whiskey, for you to say, that is the best whiskey that I've tasted in Virginia, in the country. I don't know. The sky's the limit, but I think we want to specialize in whiskey, and that's really where our heart is at the moment.
That's a great answer. I mean, there's a lot of distilleries out there who are, I think, sometimes are overstretched, but I think they learn along the way. A lot of smaller places, and even KO, that we're going to try all the things, and that's great. But you learn pretty quickly that the market right now is weird too. Bourbon is king.
Yep.
You hear the word bourbon, you think, oh, it's a lot of people. Even my friends I talk to, it's like, well, you like bourbon? Do you like whiskey? Okay, sit down.
Let's have a conversation. Okay, so what do you think you're saying by
right?
Yep.
So, that's cool. Well, okay. So what should we try first?
So we talked earlier about our white whiskey.
Yep.
So what I wanted to do is to not necessarily try the white whiskey, but talk about why we started where we did, and maybe kind of taste down the line of kind of our history. So we're going to be tasting a timeline, so to speak.
Cool.
So our bare knuckle wheat whiskey is the first product that I'd like to try. It is the aged version of our white whiskey. Okay. So this is going to be primarily wheat, 60% wheat, 30% rye, 10% malted barley. What that does is it provides some beautiful sweetness right up front, almost a butterscotch right up front, spice on the back, very easy drinking. Really beautiful to sip neat. but it's great in a Tipsy Palmer instead of an Arnold Palmer,
Sure.
or a whiskey ginger. All of your kind of classic, just easy summertime drinking. A lot of Irish whiskey drinkers will actually gravitate towards bare knuckle wheat whiskey as well.
Okay.
But again, butterscotch up front, spice on the back, really nice, easy drinking. When you look at our bottle too, the front gives you a lot of information about the actual spirit. If you flip it around to the back, you can actually see a little ring card girl holding up a card that will say aged, and then it's blank with months.
Oh, that's cool.
Yes. So what's cool is when you're at the liquor store or here at KO Distilling, when you buy a bottle, you flip it around, you can see that the one we're going to be tasting here is aged for 44 months. That gives you a better understanding of what we're actually tasting. Like I said, this product was initially aged at 12 months, which now looking back was a very young age, but it was distilled differently at that time. This one is going to be column distilled, aged for 44 months. For any listeners who are following our footsteps and tasting our product, I always like to say, you want to nose first, take a sip, let your mouth acclimate. On your second sip is where you're going to get a lot of your beautiful flavors. But again, look for that butterscotch up front, spice on the back, beautiful, easy drinking.
Awesome. Well, cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.
A lot of wheat whiskeys too. Wheat whiskey can vary quite a bit. And one of the things that I really like is the fact that there has been a change in the marketplace where there are more wheat whiskeys now. It's an underutilized style. People are familiar with bourbon, obviously, familiar with rye, even if they don't necessarily know exactly what it is. Rye seems to be a little bit more in the title. Wheat whiskey is as well. So wheat whiskey is just going to be a whiskey primarily of wheat.
That's very butterscotch. That, I mean, probably it's a referential bias, but you said butterscotch, and it's a very strong with butterscotch, but that spice kind of takes over at the end and makes it a nice rounded finish, and it doesn't stick too much in your mouth.
Yep.
But it's full bodied, and I think this would be, like you said, great in a cocktail.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a strong back.
Yep.
Oh, it's good. I'm exploring more with wheat whiskeys too, because wheat whiskey's starting to grow a little bit more.
It is,
but
what I like to tell people is, I feel like the bare knuckle wheat whiskey is the hidden gem of our line. It gets overshadowed by some of the other spirits that people are more familiar with.
Sure.
So if you're looking to get something that's classic, go for the bourbon.
Yeah,
absolutely. But if you're looking for something, it's almost like a bourbon light. It's going to give you something a little bit more unique. Again, instead of those caramels and vanillas, you're going to get a little bit more butterscotch up front, but you still have the rye, so you get that beautiful spice. Bare knuckle wheat whiskey is the way to go.
Yeah, I agree with that. That would turn a normal bourbon novice on their head and go, oh. And I love that. I love that, science of the brain. But yeah, that's phenomenal. And I'm curious. You pointed out the card girl with the numbers, and that's all handwritten on there for how many months. That's very cool. Is that a sweet spot that you found for this batch? Is it, can it be 46 months? Can it be 42 months? How does that fluctuate? So currently what you can find, we have parameters that we've set for ourselves from a quality assurance perspective we kind of talked about earlier. Yeah.
Right now what you're going to find is something in between the 3 to 4 year range of all of our small batch spirits. So we have our small batch wheat whiskey, the bare knuckle wheat whiskey. We have bare knuckle bourbon, and we have bare knuckle rye whiskey. Those are all small batch spirits, and those are going to be in the 3 to 4 year range, something in that range. With Distiller's Reserve, which are the other whiskeys we're going to try today, that is a bottled in bond product, which means obviously it has to be more than 4 years.
Right.
It has a wider range, and really it's more about us taste testing and picking the best one because it's Distiller's Reserve.
Right.
Reserving the best for that spirit. We also do have single barrel and cask strength iterations of all of these spirits. Those are going to fit within the 54 to 58 month range, so 4 to 4.5 year rather range. And we also do have our bare knuckle high rye bourbon, which is the only source product that we've tackled. We'll kind of talk about that later if you wanted to. But bare knuckle high rye bourbon is phenomenal. That is starting at 6 years. So we have a single barrel and a cask strength iteration, and that's sitting between 6 and 7 years.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So next up is the bourbon.
Instead of going the bourbon,
Yeah, please.
I normally go for rye first and then go to the bourbon.
Okay.
You can do it either direction, but that kind of follows the timeline. So
Gotcha.
we released the wheat whiskey back in 2016, right? So we started in 2015. We waited at least a year, went for the wheat whiskey. In 2017 is when we released the rye whiskey. And the rye whiskey is, I think, the one that you've actually tried before. Is that correct? Yep.
I've finished a couple bottles of that.
Yes, there you go. So
Thank you.
Bare Knuckle Rye Whiskey mash bill is very easy to remember. Just 100% rye, right? The interesting thing about this product is we initially were thinking about doing 100% rye for a product, 100% wheat, 100% corn, and then have some way of doing a, proprietary blend that somebody could come in and do with us. The problem is we didn't really fully understand what the law allowed for or not at that time, right? So that did basically have us kind of changing our perspective, and we had already made the 100% rye, and it came out really well. It's fantastic. You don't always get 100% rye, but again, it's 100% Virginia-based rye as well. So you're going to get that beautiful spice and pepperiness right up front, undertones of kind of heavier caramel or a little bit of maple, and some beautiful cinnamons in there, some vanillas, just really well balanced. And that's one of the things that I think really stands out about Bare Knuckle Rye Whiskey is how well balanced it is for being 100% rye.
Right. And what's the proof on this one?
So all of our small batch spirits are going to be 90 proof.
90 proof.
90 proof.
And the reason I asked that too, and I'm familiar with this, and that rye is just, it's a perfect balance of rye and sweetness to me. And you don't get 100% rye off of that. And it is 100% rye. But I asked about the strength of the whiskey because a lot of times you have a rye that's spicy and then it's 95, 100 proof. And that spiciness and that strength of the alcohol kind of tricks your brain. It goes, ooh, this is kind of hot, a little too much going on. But I think that's a perfect balance of what you got going on here.
What I will tell you as well is I mentioned we have cask strength iterations of all of our products.
Right.
Our barrel entry proof is about 120. And coming out, the cask strength iterations are about 120 as well. In the past, we've seen them go up a little bit. So our cask strength iterations will be sitting somewhere in the 120 to 125, 128 range. We've had some outliers a little bit higher. But Bare Knuckle Rye Whiskey cask strength was the first of our spirits to win a double gold at the San Francisco World Spirits Competition.
Very cool.
I think our rye whiskey is definitely a high point of what we can do.
Yeah.
If you're lucky enough to find that at your ABC store, you're definitely gonna have a good time.
Yeah, that's very good.
And like I mentioned too, for any listeners who are in DC or Maryland or Delaware, we do have liquor stores all over those territories that do have the product. As well as the emerging markets, those who are just building. What I would encourage anybody to do is if you can't find a product, go to our website, kodistilling.com, or ask your local liquor store, hey, can you get this product? And that will kind of work its way back to us. We'll try to facilitate that. But yeah, Bare Knuckle Rye Whiskey is phenomenal. We did a couple years back actually get awarded by, I believe it was the Manual, the best rye whiskey in America for the single barrel variation of that as well.
Wow.
Now, I don't know if they tried every single rye whiskey in America. If they did, I wish I was a part of that team because that sounds like an awesome challenge. But yeah, so the Bare Knuckle Rye Whiskey has definitely gotten a number of awards and accolades, and is well worth a try.
Yeah, well, like I told you off Mike, that was one of the first local whiskeys that I tried when I moved out here, and you had asked me what drew me to it. It really was just the locality, and also I like the rugged look of the label and the fighter on the label, and KO kind of looked neat. The branding was attention grabbing, and I tried it. It was like probably one of the best rides I've ever had. And I'm a gun to my head, I'm a Scotch guy. I love Scotch, but I'm coming much more around on bourbon. And so I drank a lot of bourbon. My dad loves bourbon. We like bourbon together. But then rye is a whole other category that's kind of the undersung hero that hasn't really had its heyday yet. It's starting to rise a little bit more. But since Prohibition, it's kind of been not as beefy as bourbon has been. And I find these little craft distilleries like KO that has a phenomenally made rye that just blows any bourbon out of the water for me. So kudos.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will say rye has had an interesting past. Obviously, rye has had kind of heydays and then low points and whatnot. And it's gone through a lot of Rye whiskey in general has kind of gone through like a value fluctuation.
Right.
That's the best way that I could put it. In the colonial time frame, that was the drink of choice.
Yep.
Later after Prohibition, basically it became kind of what people associated with rot gut. Now with the craft distillation revolution, a lot of people are producing some really good ryes, ourselves included. Now some of the best stuff. And it does compete with some of the higher end bourbons as well. And as much as I said earlier, basically whiskey drinkers come to us and leave with gin.
Yeah.
I find the same thing is true with bourbon specific groups coming in and doing barrel selects with us. Try the rye whiskey and say, you know what, maybe we need to deviate from bourbon here and actually do the rye whiskey in addition to the bourbon or something like that.
Sure.
So,
no, that's great. What's your favorite?
Of these here, probably, frankly, the Distiller's Reserve is really kind of where I'm at. But when you're talking about like the bourbon versus rye mash bill, I am much more traditionally a bourbon drinker, but I really love our rye. So I will say my heart is kind of with the rye at the moment here, but our bourbon is fantastic as well. And like I said, I'm normally a bourbon drinker, so if I'm sipping something at home, it's either Distiller's Reserve bourbon or Distiller's Reserve rye. There's nothing wrong with the other products as well. But if I want a cocktail, I'll definitely graduate, or I'll kind of gravitate towards the bare knuckle rye whiskey if I wanted like a Manhattan, bare knuckle bourbon if I'm looking for something like an old fashioned. Very versatile.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, hey, I drink all whiskey, so I don't have a favorite. What's next?
All right. So next up, I'm going to go ahead and do our bare knuckle bourbon whiskey. This, and I should have described these as I'm going here too, so if people are looking for them, but on the bare knuckle wheat whiskey, we have the red stripe at the top.
Oh, yes.
It's a Caucasian male fighter. He is Jimmy Gardner. So an Irish American fighter, or rather an Irish fighter in America, fought in the Boston area. On the bare knuckle rye whiskey, we have Jack Johnson, who is the first African American heavyweight champion of the world. And it has a teal stripe at the top. The fighter on our bare knuckle bourbon is actually a female fighter named Texas Mamie Donovan, who is probably pound for pound the best fighter in her age, in her time frame, which would be late 1800s, early 1900s. But she never actually crossed the pond to fight in England, and there were world champions that could have been claimed elsewhere as well.
Right.
So we tried to represent a diverse group of different fighters. The idea of the fighters, before I actually jump into bare knuckle bourbon, really comes from a play on KO, right? And we were talking about this off mic a little bit earlier, but KO Distilling is obviously our two co-founders, Bill Carlson and John O'Mara, but we like to say think knockout, right? It's a natural thing to think. All of the fighters actually come from Turkey Red's cards. Now, in the same way that you might eat cereals and send in cereal box tops for school supplies, back in the 1930s, you would do the same thing with cigarettes, and you would send them in for boxing cards.
Right.
So all of these are vintage fighter cards that have been turned into parts of the label. And Jack Johnson and Jimmy Gardner did actually have Turkey Red's labels. Texas Mamie Donovan did not, right? So female fighters in that time frame were not really held to the same esteem. What we did is we found a newspaper clipping from the late 1800s of her, pulled that image out and put it onto one of the other Turkey Red's cards, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
If you notice, it says round 4 in the background. We chose that Turkey Red's card specifically because it is our fourth whiskey. We had our white whiskey, wheat, rye, bourbon. So there's a lot on our labels that actually have significance that you may not ever really notice unless you come talk to us. And that's part of the reason why I love having people here at the distillery, so we can kind of show exactly who we are. We're very thoughtful in the way that we kind of approach both our whiskey, but also our branding and whatnot, which I think is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Bare knuckle bourbon. So a lot of people are surprised by bourbon in Virginia, right? You may not be, but for anybody listening, basically, bourbon can be produced anywhere in the United States. However, 95% of all bourbon is coming from Kentucky. Kentucky is owed its due, right? But we're part of that 5% outside of Kentucky, and I think that's phenomenal. There's a lot of really great things about Kentucky, which means great bourbon. They have awesome agriculture, they have phenomenal water, and they have the changing of the seasons. They have hot summers, they have cold winters. It's great whiskey weather. Well, here in Virginia, we have hot and cold sometimes in the same day, right? We have great agriculture, we have great water. we have the changing of the seasons. So here in Virginia, you can produce some really delicious spirits, specifically bourbon here as well. And I think that surprises some people, but it opens up the opportunity to talk about what is bourbon and what makes bourbon. So this is going to be 70% corn, 70% corn, 20% wheat, 10% malted barley.
Okay.
So it's a wheated style of bourbon. Another thing that a lot of people ask us about or don't really fully understand is wheated versus rye bourbon. A lot of people will kind of see the wheat whiskey and say, oh, I've tried wheat whiskeys, and then name off wheated bourbons. So bourbon has to be that primarily corn with wheat as the secondary grain, as opposed to wheat whiskey, which is primarily going to be wheat. But in a wheater or a wheated bourbon, you're going to get those softer notes. Instead of the spice, you're going to get the sweetness with a more mild sweetness as well. So caramels and vanillas, oakiness. The beauty of barnacle bourbon is you get almost a little bit of banana nut bread, hint of banana, hint of walnut, beautiful breadiness. It's all coming together, really beautiful. So I'm excited for you to try this one here.
Yeah, I am too. I haven't had too many wheated bourbons, and I'm slowly growing that palate. And one of my favorite notes, both nose and palate, is baking spices in a bourbon. There's a lot of bourbons out there that are, high in corn. You got your caramels and your vanillas and your toffee, and that's great. But sometimes it gets a little bland. So I like complexity.
So I think, again, the thing that kind of stands out to me is that kind of hint of banana nut bread right in the middle. You get caramels and vanillas up front, oakiness, baking spices, everything we're talking about here, but just a hint of banana nut bread. On the back, a lot of people will get like a popcorn or peanut or whatnot. A lot of times you'll pop popcorn and peanut oil, which is why there's association between popcorn and peanut as well.
Yeah, I think that's the buttery note that I'm getting. It's very, kind of sticks on the tongue a little bit too.
Well, if you think about the oil that is produced from corn, that's one of the characteristics about bourbon that's beautiful, is that sometimes it's a little bit more viscous and kind of sticks with you a little bit more.
I don't know if it's because you're telling me it, Rico, or because I'm actually tasting it, but that banana note is very strong.
For the next two, I'm going to have to you try it. You tell me what you think, and then I'll tell you what I think.
Okay.
But isn't that interesting? And it's not an overwhelming banana.
No.
Sometimes when I say that, people are like, oh, I'm not sure what I'm about to get into. It's not going to be a banana whiskey.
Right.
Just a hint. But, and I do love kind of dissecting different flavor notes when I'm tasting things to say, okay, well, there may be a hint of banana, but there's also a hint of walnut and breadiness. What does that all combine into? So, it's a banana nut bread, right?
Right.
And I think that the other thing that's important to understand is that the tasting notes that you taste may be different than somebody else. You may both be accurate, but it's accurate to what your palate has discovered and understands.
Sure.
So if you're somebody who eats a lot of creme brulee, you might taste creme brulee because there's airy vanillas and caramelized sugar and whatever else. If somebody who's never had creme brulee, they're not going to taste those things. They might just say, oh, that's vanilla. That's, a caramel candy or something or other that they've tasted. So it is interesting how different palates will pick up on different things, how you can send the exact same bottle to two different competitions and you get vastly different notes back.
Yeah. And one of the things I've been very forthcoming about, especially with this podcast and talking to people know I'm the whiskey guy in the family and friend group, but don't get discouraged listening to, you and I nerd out about different tasting notes, or you read something online from, a review that says, oh, you get all these different tastes, and all you get is, well, it tastes like bourbon. It tastes like vanilla. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about refining your palate. Enjoy the whiskey. If it's sweeter, if it's not as sweet, if it's drier, not as dry, kind of go there. And what's good in a cocktail? What complements different flavors? Don't get discouraged and don't feel like you have to be a nerd about it.
And if you are trying to build that palate, you got to do your homework. Right?
Yeah, right.
you got to go out and taste different things. You got to try different things, and you got to make sure your palate is able to say, yes, there's some alcohol there, but there's some other flavors, right? And the more that you try, the more you'll be able to relate. I would encourage people to try other things too. Try different candies or, fruits or whatnot. If you hear people talking about, jackfruit or whatnot, which is what we're going to talk about in just a second with the Distillers Reserve Rye, go try some jackfruit. Right?
Yeah, right.
Try some different things to see if you can relate to different whiskeys. At the end of the day, you like the whiskey or not, right?
Right.
And I do tell people a lot of times, if you're tasting versus drinking, there are some differences between those two. When I'm sitting in the office at 10:30 in the morning and we have to go through a QC process, a quality control process, I'm not drinking. I'm tasting something to ensure that the quality is comparable. But a lot of people at the end of the day just want to drink, right?
Right.
And do you enjoy the whiskey? That's really all that matters. So it's interesting dealing with a variety of different people who have different palates. Some people are very high end on their palate and they're like, I've developed this for years. I've tried everything. And that's fine. There's no issue with that. But yeah, please don't be discouraged if your palate is, I do taste some vanilla, some caramel. I really like this, but I'm not sure why exactly.
Right.
And that's actually part of the beauty of the complexity of whiskey, and specifically, bourbon, is sometimes you're tasting things and you're like, I can't place it. But sometimes that's actually part of the fun, is trying to figure out, what am I actually tasting?
Yeah. No, I can't agree more. And I mean, part of this too is, the reason why I like a lot of these things is because of the story. I hear about the background of KO and what you guys do and what you care about and the quality and the enthusiasm that you're giving me about each spirit. That makes me like it more. Mm-hmm. And there's no shame in that, but highlighting you and giving this out to the world and say, hey, try this because these guys are doing something cool. Mm-hmm. That's what I love about it too. And obviously the community that, whiskey brings us together. So anyway, shall we go to the reserves? Because
we should. So
I'm interested.
We so far have tasted bare knuckle wheat whiskey, bare knuckle rye whiskey, bare knuckle bourbon.
Yep.
Again, all of these are going to be available in ABC stores and liquor stores across the ranges we've talked about. But the more high-end variations are going to be Distiller's Reserve. These are all bottle and bond. And I want to talk a little bit about bottle and bond, if that's okay. So bottle and bond goes back to 1897 to the Bottle and Bond Act. And essentially it was the government saying, we want to give a certification to make sure when people are drinking something that says bottle and bond, you know exactly what you're getting. In order to be a bottle and bond product, it's essentially a federal government regulation or certification that says one distiller has made this in one distilling season, it has been aged for no less than 4 years, and it's bottled exactly at 100 proof, right? And in today's day and age, it's kind of come full circle, whereas before, it was to ensure people weren't putting spittoon juice or something,
turpentine,
prune juice if you're being good, or spittoon juice if you weren't necessarily. And you did have a lot of distilleries who were selling distillate that didn't come out to other people who were doing things to it to resell. So anyway, none of that here today, but it's kind of come full circle because we are a craft distillery. This is a certification that we have done this ourselves, because it has to be one distiller and one distilling season, aged for no less than 4 years, 100 proof. You get the best of what a distillery has to offer, and it's an equal playing field, as opposed to different proofs, different finishes, different whatever else. So bottle and bond has become important there. Distiller's Reserve, really, the intention there was to recognize that in Virginia, we have 400 years of distillation history, which is kind of cool. In 1620, it was the first written record of distillation within the New World. And guess what? That happened right here in Virginia. So in 2020, prior to 2020, we recognized that was a unique milestone. And our founders, specifically Bill Carlson, said, we're going to start putting some stuff away to make sure we can release Distiller's Reserve, what is we consider the best of the best that we have to offer, in a bottled and bond iteration for people to really enjoy.
That's cool.
And if you read the back of the label, right, our romance copy on the back of all these labels kind of reiterates what I'm talking about here. But we released this in 2020. In 2021, that won a double gold in the San Francisco World Spirits Competition. Mm-hmm. So it's not just us saying, hey, this is really good. The following year, we had released our Distiller's Reserve Rye Whiskey as a counterpart. And that was in 21. It was released in 22, won double gold in the San Francisco World Spirits Competition. So I like to say we have great spirits, but I want other people to know we have great spirits as well. I would encourage anybody to try it themselves and to see what they're tasting.
Of course.
So I'm going to pour our Distiller's Reserve bourbon first.
Okay.
This is a no less than 4-year product.
Thank you.
And I did want to mention that we've had 2 iterations of this that have been a 6-year product.
Oh.
Unfortunately, we are completely sold out because it was very popular. But in September, we did have a sale going on. For anybody out there who is in Virginia, September is Virginia Spirits Month. right?
Yep.
So there's usually a lot of cool things going on in September. It's already passed this year, but next year, Virginia Spirits Month, September, mark it on your calendars. We did release a Distillers Reserve 6-year, which had some additional really beautiful notes. We can talk more about that. Well, let's talk about what we have right here in front of us.
Is this the same mash as the other bourbon?
It is.
Okay.
So it's same mash bill. It's going to be that 70% corn, 20% wheat, 10% malted barley. I would be very happy to give you the tasting notes, but would you like to go ahead and taste?
Yeah.
See what you think. You let me know.
Ooh. Oh, how different. I'm glad I left some of the other bourbon in there so I want to go back to that. But it's got a little bit more spice than the other bourbon, but it's pleasant. I'm getting a lot of like a leathery tobacco on that, and that's probably the age. A lot of the wood sugar in there. But that banana note to me is gone. That's interesting.
What is it replaced by? Is there anything? To me, the banana note is gone.
Yeah.
But it's replaced by another type of fruit. And again, this is not meant to be a right or wrong answer. You can taste whatever you're going to taste. What I'm about to say when I kind of give you my thoughts is really only because these are the things that I've been tasting and I can relate to.
Yeah, I'm not placing it. Go ahead.
So in my estimation, when I taste this, I get that beautiful caramels and vanillas, but it's evolving into English toffee, right?
Oh, okay.
So the biggest thing there is an English toffee where it was just kind of caramels and vanillas before. You do get some of those same baking spices. In the middle, I get an apricot. Okay.
Ooh.
So stone fruit, apricot. And on the back end, I want you to look for a little bit more chocolate notes and toasted almond. So chocolate and toasted almond, kind of like a baker's chocolate, semi-sweet.
Yeah, I was gonna say that bitter note is probably what I'm getting.
So there's some sweetness, but some bitterness there.
Yeah. I'm not getting much apricot, but I can see where you're getting that. That's interesting.
Sometimes in the 6-year, what I found is cherry had taken over instead of apricot.
Oh.
So sometimes some of these, and if you think about apricot and cherry, both are stone fruit, right?
Right.
So cherry had taken over and it was almost like a spice cake, right? Like you would make in the fall time. One of my favorites, and that's probably why I gravitated towards that. You had ginger in there, you had, nutmeg and whatnot.
You know what comes to mind? Fig.
Fig, okay.
That's what I get on this.
Yep.
Quite a bit. Oh, that's good.
Well, and that's the beauty too, is if you're eating fig, if that's what your reference is, that's what you're going to pick up on.
Right.
Whereas if I'm eating apricot, that might be what I'm picking up on. But that's the beauty of a complex whiskey is you taste it and you say, oh, there's something there. I need to figure it out.
Yeah.
And that's part of the fun of tasting or drinking with purpose as opposed to just drinking.
Right.
And so we like to say drink KO responsibly, right? Drink KO responsibly, which really is enjoy your whiskey, enjoy what you're drinking. Don't drink more, just drink better.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's a good point. No, that's great. And I think that was a genius side by side because your normal bourbon is complex by itself, but that extra aging and quality, you can taste that. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Thank you.
So yeah, cool. Now we have the rye.
Yes. So our Distillers Reserve Rye Whiskey, again, is the third of our products. The second of our rye whiskeys to win the double gold in the San Francisco World Spirits Competition. Beautiful complexity. Same exact mash bill as our Bare Knuckle Rye Whiskey. But as Distillers Reserve, we have a lot more scrutiny on which barrels we choose in order to maintain the quality, if that makes sense. So would you like to do the same thing where you taste test, you tell me what you're tasting, and then I'll give you my thoughts?
It tastes like a rye. Boy, even that nose is different. Ooh. Little citrus going on there. The hell is that? That rye spice is so mellowed compared to the previous rye. And again, probably because of the aging process, but it's very fruited, almost like I'm getting a lot of citrus and red berry on that. It's very good. I don't know. I don't want to keep sounding like an idiot, but because you know that.
Well, again, there's no right or wrong answer. It's really just what I'm tasting versus what you're tasting, and I encourage other people to taste and try for themselves as well. And frankly, like I've said multiple times before, a complex whiskey will have you coming back to it to say, what exactly is that? And that's not a bad thing. That's a very good thing.
Yeah, not at all. I think this one definitely has much more of a sweeter rye spice to it, and it almost has like the viscosity is almost akin to your bourbon. It almost ups it, but I can't place the sweetness that I'm getting.
So for me, basically that spice has evolved into more of like a peppercorn.
Okay,
right? So it's defined itself, and when I think of flavors, I think of kind of the fracturing of flavors. Where you have caramel, right? Caramel may go into toffee or maple or something else. So it's fracturing. So the spice that you're tasting in bare knuckle rye whiskey has evolved into kind of more of like a peppercorn right up front. Not overwhelming. I do still get that kind of undertone of maple, right?
Yep.
Maple, I think, is a great way of describing that. A heavy caramel may be another good way to describe that. Beautiful kind of warm vanilla glaze and almost like a ginger snap, right?
That's what that is. I'm getting ginger too.
Almost like a ginger snap.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that I love about this is on the back end, you get this really slight hit, and it dissipates quickly, of a tropical note. Okay. And I think that might be kind of where you're talking about fruit.
Yeah.
To me, if you've ever had juicy fruit gum, it's like a generic tropical. It's not any one given thing. And I mentioned jackfruit before.
Yep.
I am not a jackfruit connoisseur, but I've been told by multiple people jackfruit is going to be as close to replicating as juicy fruit gum. So I get that kind of hit of tropical note, and it's not one tropical fruit. Maybe it is jackfruit, but it's like a juicy fruit gum. And then on the back, look for a little bit of menthol, right? Not quite menthol, right? There's a slight difference between there, but there's a beautiful kind of array of different flavors there.
You're confusing my mind now. I wish I knew jackfruit better.
It is interesting tasting with different people.
Yeah.
Because some people appreciate me saying this, and this, but then their mindset is taste all of these things or look for all these things.
Right.
There are some groups or people who come in and say, I want to taste it just by itself. I want to figure it out for myself. There are other groups that say, tell me what I'm supposed to be tasting. I'm going to look for it. And I think that really that might fall to how confident you are within your taste palette and where you are on your whiskey tasting journey, right? Like I said, the homework is really delicious, right? If you're not quite there yet, keep tasting, right? Don't taste more, just taste better. But look for whiskeys that are going to give you complex flavors that you have to really kind of think about. What exactly am I tasting here? This is a really novel, interesting flavor set. That makes sense.
Well, I will say your Distiller's Reserves definitely earned their name as reserve for the best. They are probably the most complex ryes and bourbons I've tried in a while.
That's excellent.
And of course, if we could side by side every single whiskey that exists in the world, who knows what would happen?
Well, maybe that needs to be the next podcast.
That'd be great. But no, I will say I think I like the reserve bourbon more.
Mm-hmm.
But that rye, there's something to be said there. I really want to explore that more. So I'll definitely keep my eye out for that. And I'm excited to bring this to my friends and show them, because I have a plethora of friends who are also whiskey drinkers. We enjoy. This is what brings us together.
Good whiskey drinkers have other good whiskey drinkers they know.
That's right. Cigars, whiskeys, and campfires. That's what we do.
There you go.
I love that. That'll be my Thanksgiving. This is phenomenal. I'm curious now. As we wrap up, we've done the tastings. These are great offerings you guys have. Have you guys gone into any kind of R&D for cask finishes or stuff like that?
Yeah, great question. So I think, honestly, we're a little bit behind the 8 ball as far as trying to do finishes. That is definitely something in our future. We are currently experimenting with some double barrel finishes and some rum finishes.
Okay.
I don't have anything to tell people this is what to look for, if that makes sense. A lot of that is kind of limited R&D, kind of interesting things, but may already have customers who are lined up for those types of things. But I think in 2024, you're going to see us starting to play a lot more with the finishing process. And that's something that for a very long time I've said I really want to get into. So I'm going to be excited when we do that.
Yeah.
The other thing that might be interesting that is not part of your question, but is kind of related, is we have also put away a Bloody Butcher variation of a bourbon. So we have not released that product yet, but we've put away a certain number of barrels every year for the past, I want to say 3 to 4 years.
Okay.
So that is going to become a premium product at some point here. What's fun about that Bloody Butcher corn is we went completely different on the protocol that we normally do. So instead of a sweet mash, meaning starting fresh every single time, we did a sour mash. Right. We did that on the pot still. We did on purpose some of the things that set us apart. We did the exact opposite, right? Just to try some new and interesting things out. But keep an eye out for Bloody Butcher corn coming from KO Distilling. What I will tell you is the best way to keep in contact with us and to stay up to date is we send out a monthly newsletter. We are very good about not sending out a lot of news. In fact, we probably should be better about sending out more news. But when we have, breaking news, new product, or, just a monthly newsletter, keeping people up to date, if you go to kodistilling.com, that's where you sign up for the newsletter. If you come into the distillery store, you can sign up for that right as you're checking out as well. But definitely, sign up for the newsletter, keep in contact with us. When we have the newest, greatest products coming out, we definitely like to keep our followers up to date. So that's the best way to stay in contact with us and know when that, next thing is going to come out.
I look forward to it. I think, for what you alluded to for next year, I look forward to seeing what you guys are doing. I'm a fan. I'm a consumer. I have 2 bottles at home that are half gone that will be not staying around for much longer. But I do appreciate having me here and telling me the story, and I'll be back. And I'm glad I'm in the space finally. I'm going to come back. Yeah. I don't live that far away. So,
well, on that note too, I do want to give a plug to our distillery store and the team that works our distillery store. So as much as customer experience director was the coolest title I ever had, we have an awesome customer experience director who is not myself right now, who is leading that program, does a phenomenal cocktail program as well. So when people do come on site, which you can find, and like I said, the weekend is the best time to come see us. But you can, come and try some cocktails with our products. You can do tastings of our products. You can buy bottles, right? We're sitting in a subset of an ABC store. So anything that you just tasted, you can actually purchase here and take home with you. We're always going to have the best selection right here on site. And over the weekends, we also do distillery tours. So verbally, what we kind of did today, but what I would love to do with any of your followers, listeners, is actually take them on a distillery tour so they can see exactly how we do what we do.
Yeah.
But here in Manassas, basically, we have this beautiful distillery store. We'd love to have as many people as possible.
Yeah, well, I agree. It's a cool little space, and it's very homey. I love it.
Thank you.
So, well, Peter, thank you so much for having me. This has been a pleasure, and I'll be back.
That's fantastic. We look forward to having you back.
Sounds good, man. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd appreciate it if you left us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. The more reviews, the easier we are to find. Also, if you aren't already, be sure to follow us on social media so you never miss any of our updates. Be sure to share this episode with your friends, and always be sure to drink responsibly. There are quite literally thousands of distilleries, so we're just getting started. Stay tuned for more conversations with master distillers, distillery owners, mixologists, and even bar owners, and more. Cheers.